In a quiet corner of a cafe, a veteran with fading vision sat beside his loyal service dog. Suddenly, a health inspector burst in, jabbing a finger at the animal and harshly declaring it a violation. He angrily threatened heavy fines unless the dog was removed. The room fell silent, and in that very moment the manager stepped forward with courage, firmly defending the veteran. That bold decision cost her everything, yet it marked the shocking moment when everything changed. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. Clara Matthews wiped down the espresso machine one last time before opening. The hiss of steam and the familiar smell of roasted beans gave her something steady to hold on to. At 40, she had been running Haven Brew for 3 years. She wasn't the owner, just a manager in a corporate chain, but this store outside the gates of Fort Lexington meant more to her than a paycheck. For Clara, it was a way to keep a promise to Daniel, gone since Afghanistan. "You awake in there?" Maya Carter rushed through the back door, 5 minutes late as always. Her apron was still half-tied, curls in disarray. "Barely," Clara said, flipping the sign to open. "Coffee's ready, muffins are warming." Maya laughed and hurried to the counter. At 23, she was sharp and good with people. Clara overlooked her lateness because she had the gift of noticing when a customer's hands shook or when silence was better than conversation. In this shop, that mattered more than perfect schedules. The morning started with the usual flow. A pair of soldiers in uniform grabbed coffees on their way to base. Clara handed them their cups before the register even beeped, calling each by name. Mrs. Henderson came in next, asking for her decaf with extra foam. Clara already had it waiting, sleeve in place. That was how Clara made Haven Brew different. Corporate might enforce standard menus and bright marketing posters, but she added her own quiet rituals. She kept the corner table open for men who needed a wall at their backs. She turned the music down when she saw someone flinch. She never asked a struggling veteran to explain their service dog, she just made sure there was water on the floor near the table. Little things no policy manual would ever list. But for many of her regulars, those little things meant everything. At 9:15, the bell over the door chimed. Jack Henderson walked in with Ranger, his German Shepherd service dog. His movements were careful, deliberate, one hand resting lightly on Ranger's harness as the dog guided him through the familiar space. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes moved with the particular focus of someone whose vision had dimmed but whose other senses had sharpened to compensate. He always chose the same table, the one with clear sight of the exit. "Morning, Jack." Clara was already pouring his order. Large black coffee, splash of cream, no sugar. "Much obliged." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned to navigate the world differently than he once had, careful and considerate. Ranger guided him across the room, vest marked service dog, do not pet. Most customers respected it. Clara watched as he settled into the corner. He opened a worn paperback, holding it close as he read, and rested his free hand on Ranger's head. The dog remained alert, watching the room while Jack focused on the pages. He looked more settled today than last week. She remembered when the hiss of the steamer drove him out the door, shoulders rigid, Ranger guiding him quickly toward the exit. Now he could sit, sip his coffee and stay a while. "He seems good today," Maya whispered as she stacked pastry trays. "Yeah," Clara said. "Last week he ordered a muffin. That was a first." She allowed herself a smile. Progress comes slow, but it comes. The shop filled with its regular mix, retirees reading the paper, a young mother juggling a stroller, students hunching over laptops. To corporate it was just another location. To Clara, it was a fragile community, one cup at a time. Behind the register hung Daniel's photograph. Army dress uniform, crooked smile that had carried her through the long deployments. 3 years gone, yet still present in every corner of her life. Clara brushed her fingers against the frame when no one was watching. "Another day, babe," she whispered softly. "I'm still keeping the promise." She didn't know this ordinary Tuesday would change everything. By 10:30, the morning rush had faded. Jack sat quietly, Ranger stretched at his feet, one ear twitching at every sound. The calm suited Clara. She was restocking the pastry case when she noticed something unusual. Jack tilted his head toward the voice of a younger man in fatigues at the next table. Just a brief turn of attention, but for Jack it was a mountain climbed. "Beautiful dog," the young soldier said respectfully. His hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "Thanks, son," Jack replied, his hand finding Ranger's head with practiced ease. "He's my eyes and my anchor both, saved my life more times than I can count." The soldier nodded with understanding. "Different kind of service, but I get it. We all need something to keep us steady." Clara, watching from behind the pastry case, felt a quiet pride swell in her chest. These small exchanges mattered more than anyone outside would ever understand. To most people, it was just coffee and casual words. To Jack, it was a step back into the world of the living. Maya caught Clara's eye and mouthed, "Did you see that?" Clara nodded, her throat tightening. She prayed silently that this fragile progress would hold. The bell chimed. A man in a gray suit strode in like he was entering a courtroom. He moved with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Polished shoes, slick hair, cold eyes that swept the room cataloging easy targets. Clara's stomach tightened. She'd learned to read people, and this man radiated the particular smugness of someone hunting for violations. His gaze locked on Jack's corner, specifically on Ranger. Clara could almost see the wheels turning. Here was a perfect opportunity to flex his authority, to prove his power over a defenseless target. "Excuse me," he said loudly, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. Conversations faltered. "There's a dog in here." Jack stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to Ranger's harness. The dog immediately shifted closer, sensing his handler's tension. The younger soldier at the next table looked up sharply. "Yes, sir," Clara answered, stepping forward. "That's Ranger. He's a service dog. I don't care what kind of dog it is." His voice rose, enjoying the attention. "Dogs don't belong in food establishments. Health code violation." He pulled out his badge with theatrical flair. "Elliot Crane, County Health Inspector. That dog goes or I shut you down." Clara could see it in his eyes. This wasn't about health codes. This was about finding an easy target to intimidate, a chance to remind everyone in the room that he had power and wasn't afraid to use it. Places like Haven Brew were perfect hunting grounds for inspectors like Crane, small businesses that couldn't fight back, situations where he could play the hero enforcing regulations. A low murmur rippled through the shop. A college student glanced down at his phone, subtly tilting it to record. A mother pulled her child close, whispering for him to stay quiet. The air shifted, uneasy, expectant. Jack pushed back his chair slowly, his movements guided by Ranger, who had already begun to stand, sensing their need to leave. "Look, I can leave. Sit down, Jack." Clara's voice cut gently but firmly. "You're not going anywhere." She turned to Crane. "Mr. Crane, I won't ask a veteran to leave, and I won't ask his service dog to leave either." Crane's face flushed, but Clara could see the gleam in his eyes. This was exactly what he'd hoped for, resistance. Now he could play the righteous enforcer, complete the performance. He pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open with sharp movements. Noted, floors not adequately sanitized. Employee not wearing proper hair restraint. Possible cross-contamination near pastry case. His pen scratched like a weapon, each mark designed for maximum intimidation. This entire establishment could be cited for multiple violations. Clara's throat tightened. She thought of her paycheck, already stretched thin. Rent, groceries, the small savings she guarded for emergencies. She wasn't the owner, just a manager. One angry report from Crane could end her job. Lose this, and she had nothing. No cushion, no family to lean on. Just the echo of her promise to Daniel. She stole a glance at the photo hanging behind the register. Daniel in uniform, smiling that lopsided smile. His eyes seemed to meet hers even now, steady and unflinching. "What would you have me do, love? Fold, or stand?" "I'm protecting my customers' rights," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. The standoff stretched. Maya stood frozen by the espresso machine, hands trembling so badly she dropped a spoon. A few customers looked at their shoes, unwilling to be part of it. Others exchanged looks of discomfort. No one moved to help. Crane's smirk deepened. He was winning, and everyone knew it. He pulled out his phone and dialed with deliberate slowness, savoring the moment. Sylvia. Elliot Crane, I need you at Haven Brew immediately. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Clara's stomach dropped at the name. Sylvia Morton, the regional manager, known for enforcing corporate policy with ice in her veins. Clara gripped the counter for balance. She could almost hear Daniel's voice in her head. Promises aren't kept when it's easy. The next 20 minutes crawled. Crane lingered like a predator, tapping at his laptop, marking more supposed violations, enjoying the tension he'd created. He'd found his easy target and was milking it for everything it was worth. Jack sat rigid, his hand gripping Ranger's harness as the dog remained pressed close to his side, alert to his handler's distress. The young soldier had moved closer to Jack's table, a quiet show of solidarity. Maya kept glancing at Clara with wide, worried eyes, as if waiting for permission to breathe. A couple of customers whispered angrily, one muttering, "It's just a dog for God's sake," but no one spoke up loud enough to matter. Clara felt the weight of every second. The possibility of losing her job, of walking out with nothing, clawed at her insides. But then she looked again at Daniel's picture on the wall. His eyes held her upright. When the bell finally chimed again, the room went dead silent. Sylvia Morton stepped inside like a storm front. Sharp gray suit, briefcase snapping shut in her hand, her expression calculating and cold. For Sylvia, this was a simple equation, one problematic employee versus corporate liability. The math was easy, Miss Matthews. No greeting, no warmth. Inspector Crane says you're refusing to comply with health department orders. Mrs. Morton, I'm following federal law regarding service animals. Ranger is legitimate, and Jack has every right to be here. Sylvia didn't even glance at Jack or Ranger. They were irrelevant to her calculation. Her attention stayed locked on Clara, already mentally drafting the termination paperwork. Your job is to manage this establishment according to company policy and local regulations. If the inspector says the dog goes, the dog goes. This isn't a debate. The inspector is wrong. Wrong thing to say. Clara saw Sylvia's expression harden into something like satisfaction. This was exactly the insubordination she needed to justify what came next. Miss Matthews, you're fired. Effective immediately. Get your personal belongings and leave the premises. Gasps rippled through the shop. Maya made a small sound of distress. Jack shot to his feet, Ranger immediately rising with him and positioning himself for guidance. His movement was more forceful than anyone had seen from him in months. "This is my fault," Jack said, his voice breaking with emotion and years of carried guilt. "Clara, I'm sorry, I should have just left. I've been nothing but trouble for good people my whole life." Clara turned to him, her eyes fierce. "Jack Henderson, don't you dare apologize for existing. Don't apologize for needing Ranger, and don't ever apologize for coming somewhere you belong. You served this country with honor, and you deserve to be treated with dignity." She looked back at Sylvia with her head held high. "I'll get my things." Walking to the back office felt like a death march. Her chest ached with more than pride, it was survival. Clara thought of next month's rent, the stack of bills on her counter, the way her paycheck kept her barely afloat. Without it, how would she make it? The fear cut deep, but deeper still was the promise she had kept. When she came back with a small box of belongings, the shop had gone still. Customers whispered among themselves, a mother pulling her child close, the young soldier shaking his head in quiet disgust, a pair of college students murmuring that it wasn't right. The tension was thick enough to feel. Clara stopped at Jack's table. "This isn't your fault, and this isn't over." At the door, she turned back toward Daniel's picture. "I kept the promise, honey, I kept it." The bell had barely stopped echoing behind Clara when the shop erupted into hushed voices. A mother pulled her child close, whispering angrily that it wasn't fair. The young soldier at Jack's table shook his head in disgust, muttering something about same old shit different war. Two college students stared at each other. wide-eyed, whispering that they couldn't believe what they had just seen. And 3 customers kept their phones steady until the very end, recording every word and every look. By nightfall, those clips had already made their way across social media, carried on a tide of outrage and support with each refresh. Clara knew none of it. As she walked home alone, the cardboard box from her office pressed against her chest like it was the last piece of her dignity. The streets blurred, streetlights, headlights, the cold pavement under her shoes. She moved on autopilot, but inside, she was hollow. The fear gnawed louder with every step. How would she pay rent? What about the bills stacked on her counter? She wasn't just losing a job, she was losing the only way she had to keep Daniel's promise alive. That night, she barely slept. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, her mind chasing numbers she couldn't make work. The unopened mail sat like a shadow on the kitchen counter, Daniel's photo propped beside it as if he was still watching over her. She touched the frame once, whispering, "I tried, love. I really did." When sleep finally came, it was shallow and broken. By morning, the world had already decided her story mattered. Her phone buzzed endlessly, rattling across the kitchen table as sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds. Clara sat down heavily, staring at the screen as notifications poured in faster than she could read them. The video had exploded overnight, 2 million views and climbing. #stand with Clara was trending. News outlets plastered her name under headlines, coffee shop manager fired for defending veterans' rights. She scrolled through message after message, her pulse racing. Strangers called her brave. Veterans shared their own stories of service and silence. A few small business owners offered job interviews. Reporters asked for comments, hungry for sound bites, but in between came the sting of doubt. People questioning her qualifications, accusing her of being reckless, warning that corporate lawyers would bury her. Every word blurred together until it was too much to take in. Clara set the phone down, pressed her palms against her face and whispered, "I didn't ask for this, I just kept the promise." Daniel's photo stood in silence nearby, his steady eyes giving her the only comfort she had. Across town at Fort Lexington, Colonel Marcus Reynolds was having his morning coffee when his aide, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, walked briskly into his office. "Sir, you need to see this." She held out a tablet. "It's about Haven Brew." Reynolds took it, the steel gray of his eyes narrowing as he pressed play. He watched the video of Clara standing firm, Crane looming over her with predatory satisfaction, Sylvia delivering the firing like a corporate executioner. He watched it twice, his jaw tightening more with each replay. Haven Brew wasn't just a coffee shop to him. He had sent soldiers there, men and women carrying scars you couldn't see. He knew Jack Henderson personally, had watched the old Marine struggle with demons that stretched back 5 decades. He had seen how Clara treated them all, with dignity, with patience, with care. He knew that kind of strength didn't come out of nowhere. "How many views?" he asked quietly. "Over 3 million now, sir," Kim replied. The colonel set his cup down with deliberate precision. "Get me Captain Torres and Sergeant Major Williams, and call the motor pool. I want vehicles ready within the hour." Meanwhile, at Haven Brew, the shop felt hollow without Clara. Sylvia had made it clear that business would continue as usual, but nothing about it was usual anymore. Maya moved behind the counter like a ghost of herself, her smile forced, her eyes dull. Customers asked where Clara was. Some turned and walked out when they learned she'd been fired. The warmth Clara had built was gone, replaced with something mechanical, corporate, empty. At 10:30, Maya heard a new sound, the low rumble of engines outside. She stepped to the window and froze. 3 military Humvees rolled up and stopped at the curb. A moment later, the bell chimed, and the room fell silent. Colonel Reynolds entered in full dress blues, followed by a dozen Marines. Conversations died mid-sentence. Customers stared, stunned. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen that much brass in one place. "You're Maya, right?" the colonel asked, his voice deep but not unkind. "Yes, sir," she stammered. "I'm Colonel Reynolds. These are some of my Marines. They're regular customers here." Maya glanced at the faces behind him, familiar ones. Men who always tipped, who always said please and thank you. Their presence filled the room like a shield. In the corner, Inspector Crane sat hunched with his laptop, pretending to work. His face went pale the second he saw them. This wasn't the easy intimidation he'd planned on. This was real power, walking through the door. The colonel walked directly to him. His voice was quiet, but it carried like a command. Inspector Crane. Crane shot to his feet, trying to steady himself, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Colonel, I hope you're not here to interfere with official business." Reynolds stepped closer, not threatening, but immovable. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of real authority, not the petty power Crane wielded, but the kind earned through service and sacrifice. "Yesterday you abused your position. You punished a woman for following federal law and showing basic human decency. I was doing my job." "No, you were being a bully. You saw an easy target and took your shot. There's a difference between enforcing the law and using your badge to intimidate good people." The words rolled through the shop like a judgment. Maya felt her throat tighten, tears pricking her eyes. The colonel turned to the customers. "We're here because yesterday, a great injustice happened in this place. Clara Matthews was fired for standing up for a veteran's rights, for showing the kind of respect this country is built on." The Marines began moving with sharp precision. Two approached the standardized corporate signs on the wall. Of course it wasn't legal, just symbolic, one of the Marines muttered to his companion, but sometimes statements matter more than paperwork. Within moments, they'd carefully removed the corporate branding and held up a new panel. "Clara's house, where honor is served daily." The effect was instant. Veterans in the room stood, some wiping their eyes, others clapping softly. The atmosphere shifted, not just from loss to hope, but to something fierce, loyalty. Maya was crying openly now. "But Clara's not here," she whispered. "She will be," the colonel said firmly. "Maya, call her, tell her some friends want to speak with her." In the corner, Crane snapped his laptop shut and slipped quietly out the back, his authority dissolved like smoke. Maya's hands shook as she dialed Clara's number. When Clara picked up, her voice was cautious, guarded. "Maya, what's wrong?" Maya could hardly get the words out through her tears. "I'm okay, I'm more than okay. Clara, you need to come to the shop, please, right now." Clara's hands shook as she parked outside what used to be Haven Brew. Military vehicles lined the street. Through the windows, she could see Marines in dress uniform. The new sign stopped her cold. "Clara's house, where honor is served daily." The bell chimed as she entered. Every person turned to look at her. The silence was profound, the kind that comes before something important happens. A distinguished Marine stepped forward. "Miss Matthews, I'm Colonel Marcus Reynolds from Fort Lexington." Clara looked around the transformed space, the new signage, the Marines at attention, Maya's hopeful face behind the counter. "I don't understand. What's happening is that good people recognize other good people," the colonel said. "The military community is standing up for someone who's always stood up for us." Jack was at his usual table with Ranger, but something was different. He stood straighter, his shoulders squared in a way Clara hadn't seen before. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of his younger self, the Marine who'd led men through jungle hell 50 years ago. "Clara, Colonel Reynolds wanted to hear what you did for us. All of us." Jack's weathered hands were steady now, resting on Ranger's head. "I told him how you never made me feel like damaged goods, how you gave me back my dignity, one cup of coffee at a time." The colonel nodded. "Jack told me what you did yesterday. How you've treated him and every other veteran who walks through that door. We owe you a debt." Clara felt overwhelmed. 24 hours ago, she'd lost everything. Now she was looking at something she couldn't quite believe. "Colonel, I appreciate this, but I don't know what happens next. I don't have a job. I don't have a plan." She paused, remembering her sleepless night calculating bills. "I don't even know how I'm going to pay my rent next week." Colonel Reynolds smiled. "Actually, that's why I wanted to talk. Would you come up to the base with me? There's something I'd like to show you." An hour later, Clara was riding through Fort Lexington's gates in the colonel's staff car. She'd been on base before, but today felt different. The colonel led her to a modern building she'd never seen. A sign read Veterans Wellness Initiative Phase 1 Construction. "We've been working on this for 18 months, he explained as they walked through empty halls. Comprehensive support for veterans transitioning to civilian life, counseling, job training, family support, social programs. They entered a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a landscaped courtyard, empty, but full of potential. "Problem is, we've had funding and facilities, but we've been missing something crucial, someone who understands how to create an environment where veterans actually feel comfortable." Clara walked to the windows. She could envision families in the courtyard, children playing, service dogs resting in the shade. "It's beautiful, Miss Matthews. I've watched what you accomplished at Haven Brew. You created a space where my Marines felt valued. You helped people heal in ways traditional therapy sometimes can't." He paused. "We'd like you to consider becoming our community coordinator." Clara turned, surprised. "Community coordinator? Colonel, I make coffee and try to treat people well. That's not exactly professional qualifications. Yesterday you lost everything rather than compromise your principles. You chose to stand up for a veteran's rights even when it cost you your livelihood. That's not something you learn in school." Before Clara could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A young woman appeared in the doorway, late 20s, short dark hair, intelligent brown eyes. What struck Clara immediately were the burn scars covering the left side of her face and neck. "Colonel, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to meet Miss Matthews." "Clara, this is Isabella Ramirez. Izzy served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic. She's been helping develop our programs." Izzy stepped forward with a young golden retriever wearing a service dog in training vest. "This is Sonny," she said, hand resting on the dog's head. "He's still learning, but getting better." Clara knelt to Sonny's level, letting him sniff her hand before gently petting his coat. "He's beautiful, Miss Matthews." Izzy's voice became emotional. "I saw the video yesterday. It meant a lot to see someone stand up for people like us." Clara stood, studying Izzy's face. She saw both vulnerability and strength. People like us, veterans who need help, people with service dogs, people who don't always fit in the regular world anymore. Izzy's voice cracked. "Sometimes it feels like civilians don't want us around, like we remind them of things they'd rather forget." Clara felt her heart break a little. "Izzy, the civilian world is lucky to have you." Colonel Reynolds watched the interaction with satisfaction. This was exactly what he'd hoped to see. "Miss Matthews, I know this is big. I don't expect an answer now, but if you accept, you'd have full autonomy to run programs however you see fit. Your vision, your approach." Clara looked around the empty room again, possibilities racing through her mind. She thought about Daniel and their shared dreams of helping veterans, about Jack's progress, about Izzy and all the others struggling to find their place. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, take all the time you need." As they prepared to leave, Izzy approached Clara. "I hope you'll say yes. I think you could help people like me." Clara squeezed Izzy's hand. "Izzy, you don't need help becoming who you're supposed to be. You already are. You just need people to see it." That evening Clara sat in her apartment, looking at Colonel Reynolds' business card. She thought about Daniel and a conversation they'd had before his deployment. "Promise me something," he'd said. "If something happens to me, don't stop trying to take care of people. Keep finding ways to serve." She'd kept that promise through Haven Brew. Now she was being offered a chance to keep it on a much larger scale. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Colonel, this is Clara Matthews. When do I start?" But Clara had one condition that would surprise everyone. 2 weeks later, that condition was on full display. Clara stood in the Veterans Wellness Initiative's main room, and it looked nothing like the empty space she had first toured. The transformation was remarkable, but it hadn't been easy. Her first meeting with the base administrators had set the tone. "Miss Matthews," Major Patricia Collins had said, reviewing a thick folder, "while we appreciate Colonel Reynolds' recommendation, we have concerns about your qualifications for a GS-12 position." Clara had leaned forward, hands folded, her voice steady. "What if I wasn't a GS-12? The room had gone quiet.
I want to be a volunteer coordinator, Clara continued, unpaid. That way I can focus on the work instead of bureaucracy, and if I mess up, you're not stuck with a bad hire. Colonel Reynolds had allowed himself a smile. That's actually brilliant.
It had solved everyone's problems. Clara got freedom to run programs her way. The base avoided paperwork headaches, and if critics complained, they couldn't say she was wasting taxpayer money on salary. But it also meant Clara had to find other ways to survive. That night, after her first day at the center, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, browsing freelance writing platforms, Fiverr, Upwork, content mills that paid cents per word. She'd never imagined she'd be writing product descriptions and blog posts at midnight to keep her lights on, but Daniel's photo on the counter reminded her that sacrifice came in many forms. Just until we get our feet under us, she whispered to his picture. The late nights were brutal. Days at the center, evenings writing generic content about pet supplies and kitchen gadgets, often until 2 in the morning. Her eyes burned. Her shoulders ached. Some nights she fell asleep at the kitchen table, her laptop warm against her cheek. But slowly, gradually, she was keeping herself afloat. More importantly, she'd enrolled in an online certification program for Veterans Services Coordination. The textbooks felt foreign after years away from formal education, filled with terminology she'd never encountered, theories that seemed disconnected from the real faces she saw every day. Some nights, exhausted from work and freelance writing, she'd stare at the coursework and wonder if she was fooling herself. Social work theory, she muttered one night, squinting at a particularly dense chapter about trauma-informed care models. Jack doesn't need theory. He needs someone to remember his coffee order. But she pushed through, motivated by the knowledge that her critics would be watching, waiting for any excuse to dismiss her as unqualified. Now watching volunteers and veterans transform the space together, Clara knew she'd made the right choice, all of it. The unpaid position, the sleepless nights, the determination to prove she belonged in this work. Maya had joined as a part-time coordinator, splitting her time between the center and a new job at the local library. She'd organized everything from the coffee station to a children's play area. Jack had surprised everyone by volunteering 3 days a week. Having purpose seemed to restore something in him that had been dormant for decades. Clara watched him help another veteran set up folding chairs, his movements sure and steady, Ranger supervising from nearby. The tremor in his hands had lessened as his sense of purpose grew. "Clara," Izzy called from across the room. "The Morrison family is here for their appointment." A young couple stood near the entrance with 2 small children, looking overwhelmed by the scope of the facility. Staff Sergeant Eric Morrison had recently returned from his second deployment, and his wife Jennifer had reached out because she was worried about his adjustment. "I'll be right there," Clara replied, but movement near the main entrance caught her attention. A group in business suits had arrived, and they looked like they meant business. Leading them was a man Clara recognized from local news, City Councilman Richard Hayes. He moved with the predatory confidence of a career politician, his eyes already calculating the headlines he could generate from this visit. To his supporters, he was a watchdog protecting taxpayers from government waste. To Clara, watching him survey the room like a hunter sizing up prey, he looked like trouble wrapped in an expensive suit. Colonel Reynolds emerged from his office, clearly expecting this visit. His expression was calm but alert. "Councilman Hayes," the colonel said, extending his hand professionally. Hayes ignored it, pulling out a folder thick with prepared talking points. This was a performance, and he'd rehearsed every line. "Colonel Reynolds, we're here for an official review of this facility. Questions have been raised about staff qualifications and the appropriateness of military resources being used for what some taxpayers consider unnecessary programs." Clara felt her stomach drop. She had been so focused on getting programs running, on proving herself through late-night study sessions and freelance work to stay afloat, that she hadn't considered the political implications. Specifically, Hayes continued, his voice pitched perfectly for the cameras he'd undoubtedly brought, "We have concerns about Miss Clara Matthews' appointment as coordinator. Our review shows she has no formal education in psychology, social work, or veterans affairs. No experience managing government programs. Her relevant experience appears to be running a coffee shop." The words hit like physical blows. Clara's throat tightened as she thought of her rent check due next week, the thin savings account she'd been stretching, the late nights spent writing product reviews to keep herself afloat while pursuing her education. Was she about to lose everything again? What's more troubling, Hayes continued, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight, is that this individual is volunteering in a position that should be held by qualified professionals. This sends the wrong message about how seriously we take veterans' care. Colonel Reynolds stepped forward, his posture military straight. Councilman Hayes, Miss Matthews was selected based on demonstrated ability to create effective veteran support systems. Her qualifications may not be traditional, but they're substantial. Colonel, good intentions and coffee-making skills don't qualify someone to coordinate military programs. Hayes replied, his tone sharpening. He was playing to an audience beyond this room, voters who'd see the evening news, taxpayers who trusted him to cut waste. Clara was the perfect target, a woman without credentials, easy to dismiss, impossible to defend on paper. Taxpayers deserve professionals, not experiments. Clara found her voice despite the humiliation. Councilman Hayes, while I may not have traditional credentials, I am currently enrolled in a certification program for Veterans Services Coordination. I'm learning while I serve, which seems more valuable than having a degree but no understanding of what veterans actually need. Hayes barely glanced at her, as if her words were irrelevant noise. The review committee has determined this facility should be placed under investigation pending a full audit of programs, personnel, and resource allocation. Miss Matthews, you're suspended pending review. The silence was deafening. Have and brew all over again, but this time the stakes were higher. Clara felt the world spinning, but something was different this time. She wasn't facing this alone. You can't do this, Maya said, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear. Young lady, this is adult business involving taxpayer resources. Stay out of things you don't understand. That's when Jack Henderson did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He rose to his full height, Ranger immediately positioning himself at Jack's side in perfect working position. Jack placed one hand on the dog's harness and faced Hayes directly, his bearing suddenly showing the discipline and authority that had never truly left him. Sir, I think you're the one who doesn't understand. Hayes looked at Jack with obvious disdain, taking in his worn flannel shirt, the thick glasses, the service dog at his side, with the kind of dismissive glance politicians had perfected. And you are Sergeant Jack Henderson, 1st Marine Division, Vietnam, 1969 to 1971. 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star. His voice carried the authority of command, the weight of earned respect. Someone whose life was saved by the woman you just suspended. The room went dead quiet. Even Hayes seemed caught off guard by the sudden shift in Jack's demeanor. I came back from the jungle broken, mister. Couldn't sleep, couldn't be around people, couldn't function. Spent 40 years drowning in a bottle, pushing away everyone who tried to help. His voice never wavered, but Clara could see the cost of these words in the tightness around his eyes. 5 years ago, I was planning to end it all, until I met someone who treated me like I was still worth something. Clara gave me back my humanity. Not because she had a degree hanging on her wall, but because she had something rarer, genuine compassion backed by unwavering principle. The room held its breath. Izzy moved closer, her hand brushing Sonny's head. Jack's right, she said quietly. I spent 2 years going to VA counselors with all the right credentials who made me feel like a case number. Clara's the first person who made me feel like my scars don't define me, that I'm still the medic who saved lives. From the back, Jennifer Morrison's voice broke through. This center became the first place my husband felt like himself again. The first place our children saw their father smile. That's what you're trying to shut down. Hayes pressed on, but Clara could see his confidence wavering. This wasn't going as cleanly as he'd planned. Emotional testimonials don't change the fact that this position requires professional qualifications. Jack stepped closer, and now Hayes could see the steel that had carried him through 2 tours in hell. You want to talk about qualifications, son? I've seen plenty of officers with fancy educations get good Marines killed because they couldn't read a situation. And I've seen corporals with nothing but street smarts save entire platoons. His weathered finger pointed directly at Clara. That woman has the one qualification that matters most. She gives a damn about people. and she's working her ass off to earn the rest. Clara stepped forward, her strength returning. The late-night study sessions, the financial struggles, the determination to prove herself, it all crystallized into clarity. What makes someone qualified, councilman? A piece of paper, or the ability to actually help people? I've spent months studying, learning, building skills while serving this community. You can question my credentials, but you can't dismiss the results. She gestured around the room filled with veterans, families, volunteers. I may not have started with a master's degree, but I'm working towards certification while doing the job. I'm learning from textbooks at night, and from real people during the day. If that's not qualification enough for you, then maybe we have different definitions of what matters. The response was immediate: applause, voices calling out support, people offering testimonies of lives changed. The room had chosen its side, and it wasn't Hayes. Hayes realized his carefully orchestrated performance was crumbling. This wasn't the easy political victory he'd envisioned. Instead of a defenseless target, he'd found a community ready to fight. His face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation that concerns the review committee, he said, his voice rising defensively. Feelings don't qualify someone to run government programs. Neither does politics, Colonel Reynolds said quietly, but his words carried through the room like a command. This isn't about qualifications on paper, councilman. It's about results, and the results speak for themselves. As Clara gathered her few belongings for the second time in a month, she realized Hayes had made the same crucial mistake as Crane and Morton before him. He had assumed that removing her from an official position would kill what she'd started. But what Clara had created wasn't dependent on buildings or budgets or titles, it was dependent on people caring about people. That evening, Clara sat in her apartment, laptop open to another freelance assignment, a blog post about garden tools that would pay enough for groceries. Her certification coursework lay scattered across the kitchen table, chapters on crisis intervention and family systems theory highlighted in yellow. The contrast felt absurd, writing about leaf blowers while studying trauma responses, but it was her reality. Her phone rang. Washington, D.C. Area code, Miss Matthews. This is the office of Senator Patricia Williams. The senator has been following the situation in Ashford, especially your confrontation with Councilman Hayes. She would like to meet you in person. All travel expenses will be covered. Clara stared at her laptop screen, where a half-finished article about hedge trimmers glowed in the darkness. From writing about gardening tools to being invited to meet a U.S. senator, the trajectory of her life had become surreal. The following night, sleep escaped her. She lay awake thinking about Hayes's words, about the legitimacy of her critics' concerns. Was she really qualified for this work? The certification program felt overwhelming some nights, filled with theories that seemed disconnected from the Jack Hendersons and Izzy Ramirez's she knew. But when she remembered their faces, their progress, their voices defending her, she knew something real was happening, something that couldn't be measured by traditional metrics. 2 days later, the Ashford Community Center had never seen anything like it. By 6 p.m., every seat was filled, people lined the walls, and the overflow crowd spilled into the hallway. Word about Clara's suspension had spread through social media, local news, and the veteran community network faster than Hayes had anticipated. Clara sat in the front row between Jack and Izzy, with Maya and Ranger completing their small group. Councilman Hayes sat at the panel table, looking significantly less confident than he had at the center. This wasn't his usual audience of 12 disinterested citizens. This crowd was alive, restless, leaning forward in their chairs with the energy of people who had found something worth fighting for. This meeting will come to order, announced Mayor Jennifer Walsh, clearly unprepared for a controversy of this size. We're here to review the suspension of Veterans Wellness Initiative activities and hear community input. Hayes rose stiffly, clutching his prepared remarks like armor. Mayor Walsh, council members, the suspension was made in the interests of fiscal responsibility and proper governance. We cannot allow military resources to be managed by unqualified personnel, regardless of how well-intentioned they may be. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Someone near the back muttered, "Tell that to my son." Another voice, "She's done more in 2 weeks than the VA's done in years." Hayes pushed on, but his words felt thinner against the tide of opposition. I understand there are emotional attachments here, but we must prioritize professional standards over personal feelings. That's when David Rodriguez rose slowly from his seat, gray-haired, steady, wearing a simple jacket that didn't advertise his credentials. Name's David Rodriguez, licensed clinical social worker, 20 years in Veterans Affairs, all the degrees and certifications this gentleman thinks matter. His voice cut clean through the noise. And I'm here to tell you, Clara Matthews built in 2 weeks what most programs with proper credentials take years to fail at. A swell of applause. Hayes tried to interject, but the sound drowned him out. I've seen million-dollar programs with PhD directors that couldn't create what she did in a coffee shop, Rodriguez continued. Sometimes the best qualification is giving a damn about people. Izzy stood next. Sunny leaned against her leg as she steadied her voice. Isabella Ramirez, combat medic, Afghanistan. Took shrapnel to my face 3 years ago. She touched her scars unconsciously. I've been through every traditional program you can imagine. Support groups run by people with master's degrees who read about trauma in textbooks. Clara's the first person who made me feel like I wasn't just a case study. She's studying now, learning the theory, but she had the heart first. That's what matters. The room was hushed. When Izzy sat, a woman in the audience dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Finally Jack rose. When he spoke, his voice carried 50 years of hard-earned wisdom. Jack Henderson, Vietnam veteran. I came home in 1971, ready to give up, couldn't hold a job, couldn't stay sober, couldn't look my own family in the eye. He paused, his weathered hands steady on Ranger's harness. Spent 4 decades convinced I was worthless. Clara Matthews didn't just help me manage my symptoms, she reminded me I was still the Marine who carried wounded men to safety, still worth something. You want to talk about qualifications? She qualified herself every day by showing up, by caring, by never giving up on broken old soldiers like me. Applause thundered, people rising to their feet. Clara felt the power of it sweep through her, not just support, but ownership. This was their movement now, not just hers. When the room finally calmed, Clara herself stood, not to give a long speech, but to speak one truth that had crystallized through all the struggle and study and late-night writing sessions. If you close the center, fine, suspend me again. But what then? Her voice was steady, confident. Veterans will still need somewhere to go tomorrow. Families will still need each other. People will still keep meeting in coffee shops, in living rooms, wherever they can find community, because the need doesn't vanish just because you voted away. I may not have started with the right credentials, but I'm earning them now, learning while serving. And I'll keep doing both, officially or not. The ovation this time was different. It wasn't just applause, it was a declaration. The community had chosen its side. Mayor Walsh called for a vote. The suspension was overturned, unanimously. Hayes gathered his papers with a tight jaw, muttering about appeals and oversight committees as he retreated. As the crowd pressed around her, thanking her, Clara caught Jack's eye. He leaned close and murmured, "You helped me remember something I'd forgotten for 40 years, that the world doesn't just have a place for old soldiers like me, it needs us, and you showed me that." Driving home, Clara felt Daniel's presence more than ever. She had defended one man's dignity and discovered something larger, a community unwilling to let each other fall, and her own path toward becoming the professional she was determined to be. Her phone buzzed as she pulled into her driveway, Senator Williams' office. The message was brief. "After tonight's events, the senator would like you to speak at the National Veterans Conference next month." Clara stared at the screen, then at the stack of certification materials visible through her apartment window. The ripples were spreading farther than she could have imagined, but her work was just beginning. The flight to Washington felt different this time. Clara looked out the window as the landscape drifted beneath her, her laptop bag heavy with both speech notes and certification coursework. She'd learned to carry both worlds with her, the growing national attention and the grinding work of proving herself qualified for that attention. Senator Patricia Williams' aide had explained it clearly during their prep call. "Your story proves that passion and education can work together. Congress needs to hear from people who are both learning and serving."
Yet, alone in her hotel room, the night before her speech, Clara felt the familiar doubts creep in. Policy experts, Virginia officials, congressional leaders, they'd all be in the room. People with decades of experience and walls full of degrees. She had a second-hand blazer, a community-built story, and 6 months of night school coursework under her belt. Her phone rang. "Jack, how are you holding up?" Terrified, Clara admitted. "What if I embarrass everyone? What if Hayes was right, that good intentions aren't enough?" Jack's voice was calm, grounding. "Clara, remember what you told me once. That progress comes slow, but it comes. You've been making progress too, in your studies, in your work, in everything. Just tell them that truth. You're not pretending to know everything. You're proving that someone can care enough to learn everything they need to know." His words steadied her. That night she reviewed her speech, but more importantly, she reviewed her journey, from coffee shop manager to student to advocate, each step building on the last. The next morning, Clara stood in the wings of the Reagan Building auditorium. Nearly 800 people filled the hall, policy staff, advocates, veterans groups, academics. The kind of audience that could smell an imposter from 3 rows back. Senator Williams introduced her. "Our next speaker represents something powerful, the combination of heart and mind, compassion and competence. She reminds us that the best professionals are made, not born. Please welcome Miss Clara Matthews." Applause rose as Clara approached the podium. Her heart pounded, but she found her center in the truth she'd lived. "6 months ago I was told I don't have the right qualifications to serve veterans," she began, her voice clear and honest. "And that was true. I didn't have a degree in social work or psychology, but I had something else, a willingness to learn. Not just from books, though I've been doing that too, studying trauma-informed care and crisis intervention, while working full-time. I've been learning from the best teachers there are, veterans themselves." She paused, letting the honesty settle. "I'm here because someone challenged me to prove that caring isn't enough, that you need knowledge too. They were right, so I went back to school. I study case management theory at midnight, after writing freelance articles to pay my bills. I read about family systems while volunteers run evening programs. It's been hard, but it's been worth it, because the veterans I serve deserve someone who brings both heart and skill to their care." The hall had gone completely still. Even the aides with their clipboards had stopped writing. "This isn't about choosing between credentials and compassion. It's about earning credentials because of compassion. I didn't start qualified, but I'm becoming qualified, while serving, while learning, while proving that the best professional development happens when you care enough to never stop growing." She could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the audience. To the veterans listening, you deserve professionals who know what they're doing. But you also deserve professionals who remember why they're doing it. That's what I'm working to become, someone who's earned both the right and the ability to serve you well. Slowly, people began rising to their feet, not just for applause, but in recognition of something rare, genuine growth, honest humility, and the kind of integrity that admits imperfection, while striving for excellence. When the ovation finally came, it was overwhelming. Clara caught sight of Jack in the back, Ranger at his side, giving her a quiet nod of approval that meant more than all the congressional handshakes that would follow. Afterward, she was approached by dozens lawmakers, advocates, veterans and academics who wanted to share their own stories. But it was an older man who left the deepest mark. Frank Donovan, he introduced himself, Vietnam vet, early 70s. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out a photo. "This was taken in '70, at a USO event before I deployed. That's your husband Daniel. Kid spent the whole night talking to scared soldiers, made us laugh, made us feel like we weren't alone." Clara's throat tightened as she stared at the photo, Daniel young alive, with the same quiet compassion she'd always known. "When I saw what you were doing," Frank continued, "I realized something. You didn't just keep his promise, you're carrying forward his spirit. The same kindness that steadied me back then is reaching people now through you, and now you're adding the skills to make it even more powerful." Tears blurred Clara's vision as she held the photo close. "Thank you for reminding me that his work didn't end. It's still alive and growing, in ways I never imagined."
On the flight home, Clara understood something new. She had started this journey trying to honor Daniel's memory, but it wasn't only about keeping a promise. It was about carrying a legacy of compassion into the future and making herself worthy of that legacy through continuous learning and growth. 3 days later, Senator Williams called personally. "Clara, next week we're introducing legislation modeled on your approach. We're calling it the Veterans Community Support Act. It emphasizes both community-based care and professional development. Around here, people have started calling it the Clara Matthews Act." Clara sat in stunned silence, her certification textbook open on the kitchen table beside her laptop. One stand for dignity in a coffee shop had grown into national legislation, but more importantly, it had grown her into someone capable of the work ahead. But the real test was yet to come. 2 weeks after her return from Washington, Clara received word that a delegation of VA officials would be conducting their own review of Clara's house. Unlike Hayes's political grandstanding, this would be a thorough professional evaluation by people who understood both the bureaucracy and the genuine needs of veterans. Dr. Margaret Ellis, the lead evaluator, arrived on a gray Tuesday morning with a team of 3 specialists. Clara had spent the previous week organizing files, ensuring all her certification coursework was documented, and preparing program statistics. She'd learned enough about professional standards to know this review mattered more than political theater. "Miss Matthews," Dr. Ellis said as they toured the facility, "I'll be honest, when I first heard about your situation, I was skeptical. The VA has standards for a reason." Clara nodded, matching Dr. Ellis's professional tone. "I understand completely. That's why I've been working so hard to meet those standards while continuing to serve." They spent hours reviewing programs, interviewing veterans, examining Clara's growing portfolio of coursework and certifications. Clara watched Dr. Ellis's expression gradually shift from skepticism to curiosity to something approaching respect. "Your trauma-informed care protocols are actually more current than many of our facilities," Dr. Ellis admitted during their final meeting, "and your outcomes data is remarkable. How do you explain success rates this high?" Clara thought carefully before responding. "I think it's the combination. The formal training gives me the tools to help people professionally. But the personal connection, the fact that I'm still learning alongside them, still struggling with some of the same challenges, creates trust. They know I'm not just applying theory, I'm growing too." Dr. Ellis made notes in her tablet. "Miss Matthews, I came here prepared to recommend significant changes to your program. Instead, I'm going to recommend that the VA study your model for potential replication." That evening, as Clara locked up Clara's house, she felt a different kind of exhaustion than the bone-deep weariness of her early days. This was the satisfying tiredness that comes from work well done, challenges met, growth earned rather than given. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Miss Matthews, this is Dr. Sarah Kim from the University of Virginia School of Social Work. We've been following your story and would like to offer you a full scholarship for our master's program with a focus on veteran services. Would you be interested in discussing this?" Clara stared at the message, then at the framed certificate on the wall beside Daniel's picture. From coffee shop manager to scholarship recipient, the journey still felt surreal, but what struck her most wasn't the opportunity itself. It was the realization that she no longer doubted her ability to handle it. The scared woman who'd been fired from Haven Brew had become someone who could balance multiple responsibilities, navigate complex professional challenges, and continue learning without losing sight of why the learning mattered. When Clara's plane touched down in Ashford that Friday evening, after another brief trip to Washington for follow-up meetings, she expected only Maya's car waiting at the curb. Instead, as she stepped into the arrivals hall, she froze. A crowd filled the space, veterans in ball caps, families with hand-drawn signs, neighbors she recognized from Haven Brew, and new faces too. Jack and Izzy stood at the front, Ranger and Sonny wagging their tails. Maya waved so hard she nearly dropped the flowers in her hand. Above the noise of cheers and applause, someone held up a banner painted in bold letters, "Welcome home, Clara. Student advocate friend." But there was something new this time. Standing beside Jack was a woman Clara had never met, mid-40s, kind eyes, silver threading through dark hair, holding Jack's arm with easy familiarity. This had to be Margaret, the librarian Jack had mentioned meeting at one of the center's book discussion groups. Clara, Jack called out as she approached. I want you to meet Margaret. Margaret, this is the woman I told you about. Margaret stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said simply, for helping him find his way back to the world. To me, Clara felt her throat tighten. This was why the learning mattered, why the late nights and early mornings and constant growth were worth it. Not for recognition or legislation, but for moments like this, for the ripple effects of one person deciding to become worthy of the trust placed in them. And Clara, Izzy added with a grin, I got some news too. I've been accepted to the same MSW program Dr. Kim offered you. Looks like we might be classmates. Clara laughed through her tears, realizing that her journey had inspired others to pursue their own growth, creating a network of people committed to both caring and competence. As she walked toward her car that evening, surrounded by the community that had supported her growth, Clara felt Daniel's presence more strongly than ever. She had kept her promise to him, but in a way neither of them could have imagined. She hadn't just honored his memory, she had built something that would honor the memory of every veteran by ensuring they received care from people who never stopped trying to become better at providing it. 1 year later, Clara stood in the main room of Clara's house, now officially renamed by Fort Lexington Command, watching the morning sunlight illuminate what had become known as the memory wall. Photographs covered every surface, snapshots of programs, letters from families, images of volunteers and service dogs. At the center was Daniel's picture, his crooked smile unchanged, but now surrounded by dozens of other faces representing both sacrifice and survival. Clara, you need to see this. Maya hurried in, tablet in hand, excitement spilling out in her voice. The Washington speech video just passed 10 million views, and we're getting calls from 30 states asking how to start their own Clara's houses. Clara shook her head in wonder, then gestured to a framed certificate hanging near Daniel's photo, her completed Veteran Services certification, earned through 2 years of night classes, weekend workshops, and online courses. Below it hung a letter of acceptance to a master's program in social work, which she'd start next fall while continuing to run the center. More importantly, Maya continued with a grin, Dr. Rodriguez wants to know if you're ready for the Advanced Trauma Certification Workshop next month. Clara smiled. David Rodriguez had become not just a supporter but a mentor, helping her navigate the academic side of the work she'd been doing instinctively. The combination of formal education and lived experience was making her more effective than either would have been alone. Before she could reply, familiar voices came from the doorway. Jack entered with Ranger, Izzy right behind with Sonny, now wearing his full-service vest. Jack looked stronger than ever, steady, engaged, recently engaged to Margaret. The transformation was remarkable. The broken man who'd barely been able to make eye contact had become a pillar of the community. Morning, Clara, Jack called. Hope you saved us some coffee. She smiled, warmth flooding her chest. Always. The day moved quickly. Veterans met in small groups, families gathered in the playroom, volunteers helped newcomers fill out job applications. Among them was the Morrison family, their children racing down the halls as Eric, once withdrawn, now mentored younger vets with both peer experience and formal counseling training he'd pursued at Clara's encouragement. Near noon, Clara noticed a young man standing alone by the entrance. He couldn't have been older than 23, his uniform still crisp, eyes carrying the rawness of someone freshly returned from combat. Clara approached gently. Hi, I'm Clara, first time here. The young man nodded. Yes ma'am. Tommy Rodriguez, just back from Syria. Welcome Tommy. Coffee, a tour. His eyes wandered to the memory wall, taking in the photos and the certificates hanging there. What's all that? Those are heroes, Clara said simply. Men and women who didn't make it home. We honor them because their sacrifice makes places like this possible. And those, she gestured to the certificates, represent the commitment we make to serve them as professionally as we can. Tommy's voice was quiet. Nice that people remember, and that they care enough to do it right. Clara looked at him with the same steady compassion she had offered Jack years ago, but now backed by the knowledge and skills she'd worked so hard to earn. Tommy, let me ask you something. Is this a place for people like you? He hesitated, scanning the room, the laughter, the quiet conversations, the dogs resting at their owners' feet, the professional certificates on the walls that somehow made it feel more trustworthy, rather than less welcoming. I don't know, I'm not sure I fit anywhere anymore. Clara smiled softly, thinking of her own journey from coffee shop manager to certified professional. Then this is exactly the place for you, because it isn't just for people like you, it's for people like all of us. Veterans, families, neighbors, anyone who believes service deserves both dignity and the best care we can provide, and we work hard to make sure we can provide it well. Hope flickered in his eyes. Could I get that coffee and tour now? Absolutely. And Tommy, if you're interested, we have peer support training starting next month. Sometimes the best counselors are people who've been where you've been, especially when they combine that experience with proper training. That evening, as the center grew quiet, Clara lingered before Daniel's picture and her certificates. She touched both frames lightly. We did it, honey, the promise is still alive, and now I'm worthy of keeping it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Germany. Miss Matthews, we're starting a Clara's house on base here. We've got the heart, now we're getting the training too. Thank you for showing us what's possible when you combine both. Clara smiled through tears, thinking of all the programs that now carried the Clara's house name, each one built on the foundation she'd discovered, that the best care comes from people who combine genuine compassion with professional competence, who never stop learning because they never stop caring. As she locked up and stepped into the night, the stars over Ashford glowed bright. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students to teach, new skills to learn, new veterans to serve. Clara smiled, thinking of Daniel's photo inside, surrounded now by certificates and testimonials and evidence of growth that would have made him proud. One promise kept had become a movement, one coffee shop stand had become national legislation, one woman's willingness to keep learning had shown others that the best way to serve is to never stop growing. The story was far from over, it was just beginning.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.